Hey there family, Peter here. Thank you for clicking on today's video, which is all about why I believe you aren't fat because you are lazy. So before I get into the heart of today's topic, do me a small tiny favor. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you're notified each Thursday when I post a brand new video. And also feel free to share this video, comment on it, like it, all that good stuff. Now let's get into the heart of today's topic. So, you aren't fat because you're lazy. Such a contrary belief to what people think. We see someone who's overweight, obese, all that good stuff. We assume that person has made a choice and that they're lazy, right? And I'm here to tell you that it's not really the case. And let me explain. So right now I'm in the graduate phase of working towards an eventual doctorate in clinical psychology. Yes, your boy wants to become a doctor of psychology. It's been a calling of mine for a long time and I'm finally answering that calling, so here I am. But prior to all that, my bread and butter has always been as a personal trainer and as a health coach for just over about 10 years. So I've worked with a whole bunch of different people, from the super fit to the not so fit. So I've really learned a lot. I have a lot of experience as it relates to building muscle and also weight loss. But today I want to focus on weight loss, especially as we're about to approach the new year, which is tomorrow. So happy new year when it comes. And typically with the new year just around the corner, this is the time of year for New Year's resolution, right? And of course, the big one for a lot of people, especially in America, where we have a huge issue around obesity, is the notion of losing weight, right? And so for people like personal trainers, health coaches, gyms, this is a really great time because everybody wants to throw money at the whole weight loss thing, right? So we gobble it up. I, of course, was one of those people. And so when I would get clientele coming in, the first thing I would look at them is, yeah, we're going to help you lose some weight. We're going to push you to the ground. We're going to give you some diet suggestions and you're going to lose all this weight and all will be well. And yes, a majority of these people would lose weight and a majority of them would feel great. But a majority of them would gain that weight right back in about 6 months to a year. Some people, I've worked with someone that dropped as much as 60 pounds and gain it back in less than 5 months. And I will admit this, that I would always think that they were lazy, that they weren't serious, that they weren't pushing themselves consistently. But then I started to take a step back, and I remember when I really started to think about the psychology of weight loss. What makes someone successful and what makes a lot of people not so successful? And here's the thing that I learned. When I stepped back from my traditional mindset as a personal trainer, which was to push them to the ground, have them follow strict dietary suggestions, I learned something. And here's what I learned. I learned to start asking deeper, more profound questions, particularly questions about their past. And what I learned from asking deeper, more profound questions and listening carefully, what I began to uncover about a lot of these people was this. Many of them had unresolved trauma. Trauma from their childhood, trauma from their teenage years, trauma from their early adulthood. Many of them had trauma. Now, some of these trauma was just on the surface. You could clearly, perhaps they were abused sexually, physically, psychologically. Some had trauma which they never really knew was trauma. Like, for example, perhaps their fathers weren't around, their mothers weren't around. People have trauma in many different ways, and one trauma is not necessarily bigger than the other. They just affect people in different ways, right? And as I started to explore this further, I began to realize something. That for many of these people, their weight gain was a direct result, if not an indirect result, of the trauma they had experienced. So with that being said, what am I trying to say here? Well, you see, what I learned was this, that these people had never addressed their trauma. And because they had never addressed their trauma, their weight loss was never ever going to be permanent, you see. I can give you a perfect example of a situation like this. I have a client, I'll refer to her as Janet. That's not her real name, but Janet has been a very, very good friend of mine and was a client for many, many years. Nobody worked harder than Janet when she was training. Nobody dieted harder than Janet. This woman was diligent, type A personality, the perfect type of client. Janet would push herself hard, but that last 15 pounds, she just couldn't get it off. She was a 40-plus-year-old mother of 2 young children, had a seemingly charmed life, married to a well-off guy, And she trained with me 4 to 5 days a week, right? But she just couldn't lose the weight. And then one day, Janet and I was just talking, and I'm not sure what came over her. She decided to tell me, you know, Peter, I have to say this. My marriage sucks. My marriage sucks royal ass, man. I am in turmoil. I'm constantly fighting with this man. I am exhausted. I'm exhausted as a mother. I'm exhausted as a wife. I am just tired. And what I realized in that moment, I felt such empathy for Janet was in a constant traumatic state. Her whole life was one chronic stress after the other. And throughout all this, she was still trying to lose weight. And I realized in that moment, even with my limited knowledge back then, that she was never ever going to lose that weight because her life was in a constant state of flux. In a sense, her mental health was never quite there. Or to bring this back to my major point, which is Janet is not fat because Janet is lazy. Janet was struggling with weight because Janet's mind was completely shot. And if her mind was completely shot, then her body was never ever going to follow. Even if it followed, it was going to be temporary because again, her mental state was not where it needed to be. So for those of you who are about to sit down this evening or tomorrow in 2021 and write out your fitness goals and your weight loss goals, and you're about to sign up for that expensive gym or buy that new piece of equipment for your home or hire a nutritionist or hire a personal trainer, before you do any of that stuff, I want you to sit down with yourself and I want you to start to really tap deeply into the things that you have not addressed, the traumatic issues you're probably currently experiencing or the things that you have experienced. And it could be anything that has profoundly affected you negatively from a mental health standpoint. I want you to sit down and start to think about them and think about how they may be tied into your weight loss issues. In effect, I want you to address your mental health before you even attempt to try to tackle the issue of weight loss. Because if you don't, right? If you don't, even if you lose weight, the underlying issues have not been addressed, and that weight will come back because that trauma has not been addressed. So what I want to tell you is, you are not fat because you are lazy. You are struggling with weight because oftentimes, and people may argue that this is anecdotal, and to a certain extent it perhaps is, but I really believe this. Most people's issues around weight is tied to an unresolved traumatic event. Now, the level of severity of that traumatic event is questionable. Some have it up here, some may have it down here, but it doesn't matter. It affects us in different ways. I want you to understand that your weight loss, your weight issues has nothing to do with you being lazy. There is a psychological block. And until you address that psychological block, you will always struggle with the weight, right? How do you address those psychological issues? Seek help. Seek mental health help. It could be in the form of just talking to a friend, a spiritual advisor, a clinician, i.e. a psychologist, therapist, licensed clinical social worker, whatever it is, somebody that can help you unlock the psychological block. Because if you don't do that, eventually, and I promise you, you lose the weight, or you may not, but you lose the weight, but eventually it's going to come back because you cannot sustain it, because ultimately that block will kick up back again and you will be in problems. So I hope this message resonates with you, and I hope you find the time to take care of up here first before you start to address here. And as always, family, stay well and have a blessed and powerful 2021.